Morphology of flowering plant means angiosperm. In this chapter, in the previous session, we have discussed regarding the different organs of flowering plants, and we have started in detailed description of the first organ of a plant, that is a root, which develops from radicle. It is positive geotropic, positive hydrotropic and negative phototropic organ, and we have discussed the difference between the type of taproot and the adventitious root, and we have also discussed regarding the regions of root. Now today we will discuss what are the normal functions of a root, and we will also discuss the special functions of a root. So let's first start with the normal functions of a root. What are the normal functions of a root? So here we are going to start with functions of root. What is the purpose and what is the function of a root? The first important function of the root is the fixation. Fixation is the first important important functions of the root. That means with the help of a root, the plant can fix or attaches itself to the soil. So it holds the plant or the steady nature of a plant, that is due to a fixation of the plant with the help of a root. So this is the first function of a root, fixation. The second function of the plant root is absorption. So what is absorption? Absorption means it takes the minerals and the nutrient and water from the soil, and the root will supply to other parts of a plant. So this function is called as absorption. So these are the two main important functions. These are the normal functions of a root. Fixation, it fixes the plant through the soil. And the second one is absorption, it absorbs the water and minerals from the soil and supply it to various parts of a plant. These are the main functions of a root. But here, in a few plants, the root have been modified to perform a special functions. So there are variety of the special functions a root can perform in a specific plant, and for that purpose they are modified. So now we will discuss a modification of a root for performing a special function. So let us discuss the modification of a root for performing a special function. Starting with the first one, modification of root. The modification of a root that is done to perform the variety of special function. One of the special function is storage of food. Generally, you know that who will prepare the food in a plant? The leaves. Leaves prepare a food for a plant. But the extra food that is prepared by the leaves, they are stored in the root, and that is going to be used during a leaf fall or during a fall season, because in the fall season the leaf gets a fall off. Okay, and the food that is stored in the parts of a plant that is utilized. So here there are certain plants in which the roots have been modified to store a food. You know that there are two types of a root. So I will tell you the examples of the taproot and the adventitious root, which are modified to perform this function. So let's discuss the example, both examples. So the example of a taproot which is modified for storage of food, the examples are carrot, radish, beet. They are the examples. See, these all are the root. In this root, and they all are the examples of a taproot. Okay, in this the food is stored and they become a fleshy in nature. Like here in the case of a carrot, due to a storage of a food, its shape becomes a conical. So you can also call it as carrot is an example of conical taproot. In a radish, due to a storage of food, its shape becomes a fusiform. So radish is an example of a fusiform taproot. Beet, here the shape of this root becomes a needle-like, very pointed. So it's a kind of a napiform taproot. So remember this for entrance exam. Carrot is an example of conical taproot because here the shape is conical. Radish is an example of fusiform taproot. Here the shape is fusiform. And the beet is an example of napiform taproot. Its shape is needle-like. And all these are modified for this function for storage of food. Similarly, the In few plant, the adventitious root also modified to do the same. Means it can also store a food. And here the examples are, the first example, it's a sweet potato. In sweet potato, the food is stored in its root, and it is an example of adventitious root for storage of a food. Next example, you can say that it's asparagus. Next is the dahlia. So these are the examples of adventitious root for storage of food. Okay, so this is the first modification for performing a storage of a food. Now the second modification is for support. The another purpose for modification of a food root is for support. Like for an example, in the support there are two kind of roots. I will give you an example. The first one is called as stilt root, and the second one is called as prop root. What is a stilt root? Stilt root is observed in the maize. Like suppose this is a maize. In the maize, these are the nodes, internodes, and this is the ground level. Now maize is a monopod plant, so here the adventitious roots are present like this, adventitious. You know that these adventitious roots are not strong, they are weaker in nature. But here in the maize, it has a lots of weight. So what happens? In the maize, the node which is present nearer to a ground, this is a node which is present nearer to ground. From this, the extra adventitious root develops, which grow obliquely. They grow obliquely and they enter into a soil. This root provide a support. This root provides a support to a plant. So this kind of a root which is observed into a maize plant, this is called as a stilt root. And the stilt root are meant for support. They provide an extra support. So the example of a stilt root is that can be observed into a maize plant. Even it can also observed into another plant, it's called as pandanus. Okay, so these are the two examples in which a stilt root is observed. Now what is the example of a prop root? Prop root is also for a support, mechanical support. And the best example you know it's a banyan tree. You might have seen this banyan tree. In the banyan tree, if you see that, its branches will develop like this. The horizontal branches will develop. But these branches of this banyan tree are such that they are heavy. As the time grows on, these branches becomes very heavy and thick. And what happens when they develop horizontally, its weight becomes so much high. So the plant gets fall off upon its own weight. And to prevent this, from these branches, you might have seen that the roots, adventitious roots are developed into a group. And they extend towards the downward and enter into a soil. Okay, whereas you are also hanging on them, you are also utilizing as a swing. And what they are the roots, and they are for providing the extra support. Okay, and so this is an example of a prop root. Prop root is observed into a banyan tree. It's observed into a banyan tree. Okay, so the banyan tree is an example of prop root. Maize and the pandanus, they are the example of stilt root, and both stilt and the prop root, they perform a function called as support, mechanical support. Okay, they give a support to a plant. So this is a special function. It's not a normal function of a root. Okay, normal functions are only two, fixation and absorption. But here the roots are modified to perform the special functions in certain plants. So we have discussed the first two modifications for storage of a food and for support of a plant. Now we discuss the another, that's a climbing and the clinging roots. Climbing, or you can also call it as clinging root. What is this climbing and the clinging root? This climbing and the clinging root that is observed into a plant called as pothos. Pothos is an example. If you see this pothos plant, in this pothos plant, its stem is very weak. And so that's why what happens, this pothos is acting as a climbers and the peanuts. So it climbs and it needs a support. So what happens here, from the nodes of its stem, node of its stem, the brown adventitious root develop. These brown adventitious roots are such that they are sticky in nature, and they help a plant, they help this plant, pothos plant, to climb on the another support. So they help in a climbing. So that's why we are calling it as climbing root or the clinging root. They secrete a sticky material, and due to secretion of the sticky material, they you can say that they can climb onto another surface. So this is the example of climbing or the clinging root. Okay. So these are the three functions. Even there are also certain other functions for which the modification occurs. So let's discuss the other functions for which the modification occurs. Now we are discussing the another function. The first one is photosynthesis. Normally you know that the photosynthesis is the function of a leaf. The root cannot usually perform the photosynthesis. But here in the plant called as Ctenospora, remember example, the example of photosynthetic root is in the Ctenospora plant. Okay, this Ctenospora is such a that it has very few number of leaves and it has very small leaf. That means the leaf, it can prepare its food, but that is not sufficient to fulfill its demand and requirement. So what happens in this Ctenospora, the roots are developed. These roots are photosynthetic in nature, means it can also perform a photosynthesis. Such kind of roots are called as assimilatory roots. What it is called as? Assimilatory roots. Assimilatory roots means those roots which can perform a photosynthesis. This is called as assimilatory roots, and that is observed into a Ctenospora. Okay, so this is an example of roots for a special function called as photosynthesis. Now here the another functions, it's called as breathing. If you see that roots when it is penetrating in the soils, it can also take up the oxygen from the soil. No doubt it can also take up the oxygen from the leaves, but the roots also help in the absorption of gases from the soil. The gas that entered through the root. But there are few plants which are growing into a swampy region, like you can say that muddy region and in a salty region which is found nearer to a coastal lines. Like for an example, in case of mangroves. Mangroves are such a plants which are growing nearer to a coastal region in a salty soil. It is muddy and salty soils are present. In this case, due to a presence of a mud and the water, it cannot get up the oxygen. In a normal soil, between the particles of a soil, there is a gap, what we are calling it as air pocket, and through which it can absorb. But here they are growing into a muddy region or coastal region with a salt, it cannot get the oxygen. So what they develop? They develop the opposite root. Usually, suppose assume that these are the roots which develops towards the direction of a soil, means it is positive geotropic. But here the roots, they are developed in the opposite direction. It grows towards the sky. Okay, so they develop a negative geotropic, negative hydrotropic and positive phototropic. This is very exception. Okay, roots in them, and they have a pores or holes on its surface. Pores are present, and these pores helps in the breathing or exchange of gases. So that is observed into a mangroves. Like I will give you a specific example, Rhizopora, and the second example is Avicennia. In this you can find a positive geotropic, negative geotropic, because here the root develops in opposite direction of a soil. Negative geotropic, negative hydrotropic. Water is present in the soil, but here it develops in the opposite direction, and here it develops in the direction of a sunlight. So you can say that it is positive phototropic roots develop. In case of Rhizopora and the Avicennia, which are means for breathing, exchange of gases. So this is the another special function for which the roots have been modified. Till now we have discussed the 5 functions. First is storage of food, second is for support, third is for climbing and clinging, the fourth one is photosynthesis, sixth one is breathing. Now we are moving ahead and we will discuss again the other functions, the special functions for which the roots are modified. So let's discuss the other functions. Here in the other functions, The roots which have been modified are for, you can say that it is absorption of moisture, absorption of moisture. So what happens in this case? The absorption of moisture, it is observed in case of orchid. See, orchid is an epiphytic plant. Remember, the orchid is an epiphytic plant. It grows on the branches of other tree. So here the root doesn't remains in contact with the soil and hence cannot absorb water. But here they are growing in the soil, okay, and it will, they are growing on the other plants, so it doesn't have access to water. So their roots have been modified in such a way that it absorbs the moisture present in the surrounding environment. Okay, so this is called as an orchid, which is used for performing spatial functions. Why it can absorb? Because it has a specialized tissue called as velamen tissue. And due to the presence of this velamen tissue, it can absorb the water from the atmosphere. Okay, so this is for absorption of moisture. Next example, which is a parasitism. Few plants are such as that which can act as a parasite, means it depends on the other plant for its food and water requirement. Here just you have to remember the two examples. First is Cascata and the second one is Loranthus. Cascata is a complete parasite. Complete parasite, that means it is depending on the other plant for its food and water, both requirement, food and water. And the Loranthus is an example of incomplete parasite, means it depends on the plant, other plant for its water requirement and the mineral requirement, but it doesn't depend on the food requirement. This plant prepare its food by themselves, but for water and mineral it depends on the other plant, so that's why it's called as incomplete. In case of a Cascata, it depends for both food and water requirement into a plant, so it's complete parasite. Another example is symbiosis, very important. Another function is a symbiosis, and the symbiosis is observed into a leguminous plant like bean, groundnut, etc. Their roots have been modified in such a way that it has a nodules. And in these nodules, the bacteria can reside, rhizobium bacteria can reside. And both have a mutual beneficial relationship between them. Bacteria and the plant has a mutual beneficial relationship between them. This is called a symbiosis. And that is observed into a leguminous plant like bean, groundnut, etc. And even there are also few plants which are means for reproduction like vegetative reproduction. And the vegetative reproduction, the root who perform this vegetative reproduction in a plant, you can call it as sweet potato. Sweet potato. Here the roots, from the roots of this sweet potato, another plant of a sweet potato develops. So this is an example. So that's all about the spatial functions. You have to remember it's a spatial function and the modification with examples. Okay, so here I am just listing out the spatial functions of a root. First is storage of a food, second support, third one is you can say that climbing, fourth is photosynthesis, next is fifth one is breathing, next is absorption of moisture, next parasitism, next symbiosis, next vegetative reproduction. These are the functions. So you have to remember the functions and its example. These are the spatial functions. For that, the roots have been modified. So here that's all about the root. In the next session, we will discuss regarding the stem. So students, learn it thoroughly. Keep learning, keep watching, like and subscribe this channel. Thank you for watching.